Thank you all for joining today's webinar brought to you by the Tribal Law and Policy Institute and the National American Indian Court Judges Association. Today's webinar is titled Strengthening Community Outreach and Engagement and will be presented by Johanna Farmer, the Associate Director at NIJA, Mary Rodriguez, Program Attorney at NIJA, Hensley Sherman, Program Attorney at NIJA, and myself, Chantel Cloud, Tribal Court Collaboration Specialist at TLPI. I will now turn it over to Johanna to introduce herself and to get us started.
Hamadakyapi Chante Washte Unapi Chuyuzapi. I just said, hello, my relatives. I shake your hand with a good heart. Today, we're going to be talking about how we can work at engaging and conducting outreach with the community. Next slide. Chantel already introduced all of us, so thank you for that, Chantel. Next slide, please. We want to ask all of you, what is something you're working on now that you wish more people in the community knew about? Whether it be program, an initiative, is there something you're working on now that you wish the community knew about or knew more about? Harm reduction. Great, Lori, thank you. Domestic violence, MMIP risk factors, developing a tribal advocate program for courts, peacemaking circle services. Everyone feel free to just keep putting answers into the chat. We're going to move on to the next slide. Our work is rooted in community, whether it be those we serve, those that are participating, those we want feedback from, those we want to engage. So whether you're building a healing to wellness court, launching a youth program, or addressing criminal activity occurring in your community, meaningful engagement is what makes your mission, your program real in people's lives. So outreach is one way to amplify your mission. So whatever it is your program is doing, your department is doing, the initiative that you are doing, conducting outreach is how people learn about your work. So if they don't know about it, how are they going to be able to engage in it? How are they going to be able to participate in it? And then how are they going to understand that they are going to be a part of it? So when people are involved, they become partners in your work, not just recipients. So this can help make sure that you have programming that's community-led. Engagement can also help break down those silos that exist in our communities. You can identify shared goals that you have. You can form coalitions of like-minded groups. You can create collaborative opportunities with other departments, programs, schools, and other stakeholders who have a vested interest in the program that you're working on. Collaboration builds community capacity far beyond what one group could do alone. So one example from the work that I did before I came to the National American Indian Court Judges Association was work with the Basquiat tribe. As part of that work, we formed a career and technical education consortium. And that consortium brought together all of the programs and departments that were providing education around things like nursing or construction. And so bringing together the groups also helped to make sure we weren't duplicating things across departments or programs. Outreach also builds advocacy and education. So when people are engaged and informed, they're more likely to speak up, to support a policy, and then to educate others. So the more people you educate about your program, the more people there are out there speaking about what it is that your program is doing. So you're not just building a program, you're thinking about what kind of movement do we want to make, right? So when you're thinking about a healing to wellness court, it isn't just about people coming into your healing to wellness court, it's about people being healthy in your community. Another reason outreach and engagement is important is to funders. So funders want to support work that's rooted in a real community need. And then also backed by community voice. So this is something the community wants, they say they want it, and they need it in their community. Outreach helps build that visibility of your program and shows that your program has both impact in the community and support from the community. Strong engagement also creates a positive image of your program. If you're out there in the community doing outreach, doing engagement, the community can recognize you, they understand what you're doing, you can be seen as approachable, responsive, trustworthy. It's how you build those relationships over the long term. The reputation that you build in the community also can help determine whether someone chooses to work with you, to volunteer for your program, to recommend your program to others. So it's important to be engaged and out in the community because people can see you. Engagement also gives you direct insight into what's working and what's not working. So when you're engaging with people, they can tell you, here are the things that we see that are working, or here's what we see that isn't working. You can also make data-driven improvements by listening to the people that serve you. It can lead to smarter decisions, better outcomes, and a more efficient use of resources. Ultimately, community outreach and engagement sustains your program. When the community is invested in your program, programs are more likely to survive leadership changes, funding gaps, or unexpected challenges. The community sees the value of what your program brings to the community. When I was working at Bosco Yaqui, we had a truancy reduction program called the Attendance Achievement Program. And when it started, there was some resistance against, the truancy initiative. But once the community saw that the Attendance Achievement Program was strength-based and designed to help build education in the community really got behind and valued what the Attendance Achievement Program was bringing to the community. And therefore, it could last through changes in council leadership, in times when there weren't funding that existed, because the community really valued what the program brought into the community. Next slide. So as we look at strengthening outreach and engagement, we have to understand what are the community needs. So listening isn't optional. It's foundational to building up your program. Too often, programs are designed for communities instead of with them. So powerful ideas can come from those that are most affected. So it's important to be able to gather community input to put it into your program as a part of outreach and engagement. If we have a program that isn't serving the community needs, people aren't going to use it, and therefore it's not a useful way to use our limited resources. So how do we make sure we're understanding what the community needs are? So there are a number of ways that we can gather community input. So surveys and focus groups can give us structured feedback, so we can design them, and hopefully we design surveys with people who are going to be able to take the surveys. Community listening sessions can offer open spaces for people to speak their truth about what it is that they want to see in their community. And then partnership with leaders, elders, youth, and other stakeholders can help uncover needs that may not show up in data, but are very real needs that exist in the community. So it's important that we're taking the time to have listening sessions, to partner with others. One thing I would regularly do was go to the Elders Council and say, this is the programming that we're looking at building. What kind of feedback do you have on it? So, one of the things to think about when you're conducting outreach and engagement is what voices already exist out there that you could potentially tap into to get some of this feedback to understand community needs. And then as we gather feedback, we could look at what themes are emerging, what needs are the most urgent, and then how can we prioritize those needs while still honoring the voices that we've heard. Next slide. So as a foundation for the work that we do in our tribal communities, it's really important that we practice principles of culturally responsive engagement. Every community brings rich histories, values, and ways of knowing, and we need to honor those. We need to make space for traditions and languages and cultural practices in the work, not just in the way we design programs, but in the way that we conduct outreach and engagement. Building authentic relationships is so important. It isn't about showing up once and then leaving, getting what you need from someone and then never returning again. It's about long term, authentic relationships that are rooted in trust and respect. So, when you're thinking about outreach and engagement, think about how you build those authentic relationships with people. Putting community members at the table, not just for input, but for decision making, is really important when we're looking at culturally responsive engagement. True engagement is co creation, having people at the table as you're making these decisions in advisory groups, in listening sessions, and then approaching communities with humility. We're not experts with all the answers, so be open to learning, um, being corrected about what it is you're doing. For those of us that go into communities where we're not a community member there, how do we utilize community members to make sure that we're being culturally responsive? Our values might be different than their values, and how do we recognize those things and honor those things? Communicating with transparency and respect, I think, is one thing that goes a long way to build those authentic relationships, as well as to honor the community that you're working with. Having transparency about what it is you're doing can really show people that you value, that there's nothing you're hiding, that you value what they're bringing to the table, that you're respecting them, um, being honest about what you can and can't do when you're doing outreach and engagement, and then follow up and follow through with what you're doing, and always thank people for their time and insight. It's very valuable. And then coming back to committing to long term partnership and accountability, trying not to disappear when the funding cycle disappears. How do you continue to engage in these relationships even if the funding has ended? Being accountable to the people that you serve, to the people in the community, not just to funders, not just to tribal council, not just to your advisory board, but really valuing the people that you're serving is really important when you're looking at being culturally responsive when you're engaging. And I will turn it over to Chantel.
Thank you. Next slide. Great, thanks, Johanna, again. The next few slides, we're going to talk about creating a successful outreach strategy. We're going to discuss setting clear goals and why that is super important to start out with, identifying your target audience and how that's going to then help you craft your messages to make sure that what you're wanting to be heard is heard, how to choose the right methods to reach the people you want to reach, how to leverage technology to get more of your message out there to more people, and then evaluating progress. Next slide. Okay, so the first thing that we want to talk about is setting clear goals and why this is important. So the first thing that you want to know about goals is that it's going to help guide you throughout your whole process. And it's going to be what you're trying to accomplish with your outreach and collaboration. And sometimes we have a lot of goals and it can get kind of mucky and we can get stuck in that realm because there's so many things that we want to accomplish. So what you would really want to do is look and see what is it we're trying to do? Are we trying to bring awareness? So maybe you're gathering data on a certain issue and you want to start addressing it, but you want to bring that to the community and say, hey, we feel like this is an issue and this is where we're going to kind of start the conversation about building those relationships and that collaboration with those people that you're wanting to work with. Is it education? Are you wanting to educate the community on something that is an issue for you in your program or the court or your department, whatever it might be? Is it enrollment? Do you have a new program and you're wanting to reach out to potential clients or a certain population and you're wanting to engage them with helping them to understand what the program is and how it might benefit them? And then engagement in general. This could be that you have a program or an issue that you're working on and you want to engage other departments, tribal council, tribal elders, whoever it might be. So you're looking at that from that frame. And then another area where we see, outreach is for funding. A lot of time there's grant funding that we're looking at. We're looking at maybe getting other funding sources to sustain programs that we might already have. And so it's really important to look at your goals and say, what exactly is it what we're trying to do? For example, you might have a healing to wellness court and you're looking at engaging other departments to help support those clients. So you might have a boys and girls club that can say, you know what, if these clients are going to classes, maybe we can support them by offering childcare, or maybe, a gym membership because the clients that you're working with want to get healthy, but they might not be able to afford that. And so those are the different types of things that you could be looking at accomplishing and setting goals around. And most likely, like I said, you're going to have multiple goals. So what you want to do is focus in on your priorities to start out with. And that way you're able to focus your resources and really also think about what specific talking points you're going to have going forward, and then also focusing on the time that you might need to have those conversations. So these are really going to be key in determining the path that you take in those strategies. Next slide. Okay, next, you want to look at really identifying who that target audience is. And again, you may have different audiences for different goals. It could be the entire tribe, it could be tribal council, it could be other agencies or departments that are outside of the tribe. It could be other state courts or federal courts. There's a plethora of different people that you might be looking at trying to reach out to. And each one is going to have their own ways of communicating, if you will. So you're going to also want to look at what challenges there might be, what kind of priorities those entities may have, what kind of behaviors you might be looking at. So for example, if you're going to tribal council, that will look a little different than if you're going to be at a table with maybe tribal elders who are, having a community dinner. So those are definitely things that you want to look for. Also, you may be working with somebody who's coming in and out of your agency or the court, or who's already engaged in some kind of resource, but you're actually then trying to give them more information about a project or a program that might benefit them. And so really looking at who that audience is and tailoring your message is going to be helpful. And for example, if I was to go to tribal council, I would want to make sure that I was aware of what it is they're interested in hearing, and knowing that I may only have an hour, so I have to be very clear and concise. Whereas if I'm going to a community outreach program or event, there might be 2 or 3 hours allotted for that time. So I may be able to have more time to give more information and share more examples. You may also just be at a career fair where you have a vendor table and really you're sitting there with some information and answering questions for people. So all of those things are important to take into consideration. And of course, those are just some examples. You may have some own thing, your own things in mind that you're working on, but take these into consideration and really try to make sure that your outreach is appropriate and that it's for the population that you're working with. Next slide. Okay, so here you want to make sure that you're crafting your message so that it will be heard. Again, you're going to have different messages for different audiences. It may be formal, it may be informal. You may look at visuals, and you may also be looking at, how am I going to speak so that my message is heard? And so you want to consider your word choice. If you're giving printed materials of any sort, you want to consider the reading level, and the best practice in that is somewhere between a 4th and 6th grade reading level so that it's easily comprehended by all sorts of folks at different stages. Again, you're going to have different messages for different audiences. So it may be appropriate to have technical messaging for certain folks. And, it may be very inappropriate if you're going to be meeting with people that aren't really concerned about that level of wording. So if I, for example, was going to meet with my elders, I would speak very differently to them than if I was going to meet with federal court judges. So those are things to take into consideration. One of the things that we recommend too is if you do have the time and you have the capacity and it's going to be more of a formal informational session, you might want to have PowerPoints available so that you can show, the data. You might want to have graphs. You might want to have other things that are supporting whatever it is you're doing. For example, if you have a family group decision-making program that you're wanting to go through, you may want to have, a picture of how a session might look, or, families that have participated, of course, with consent. But those are just different things to consider. As when is it, important to have other information that is going to support what you're trying to do and how you're trying to get that message across. The other thing that I would also suggest is, considering who the spokesperson will be. You may have somebody who, is going to be more easily heard by folks than somebody else. And you might say, okay, well, we only will have one person that's going to do all of these outreaches, and that's fine. But I would suggest, really considering, who the messenger is, because that may also make a big difference. So if you might have somebody who's not a part of the community and they're going to come in and talk to your tribal council or different things like that, you may want to have somebody who is from the community there and who has those prior relationships that can make that introduction. Like Johanna had mentioned earlier, you have to build that trust. And so it's easier when you have somebody that already has that trust built, being a part of that conversation and really kind of supporting the person that is giving the information to the group that you're working with. And I find, especially if you have tribal council that you're working with, sometimes it's the chief judge, sometimes it's a director of a department that is going to go, and they're going to be able to receive that message a little bit better. And also, having the data, that's always a big thing, is being able to have your data to support what it is you're getting out, especially if you're trying to educate a group on certain issues. You want to have the information that is going to help them believe that it is something that's necessary for them to buy into and invest their time and energy in. The other thing also is really considering who's passionate. I always talk about champions. Find a champion for your message and somebody who really is passionate about what it is they're doing, because then that is going to overflow into that conversation, and it will help people want to hear more and say, wow, this person is really concerned about this issue. They're really knowledgeable about this. I want to hear more. How can we work with you guys? Or another thing to do is also within your own group, you may have people who know people and who can help you make those connections as well. Because it may be a matter of, who is going to be the best person to get into the group that we're trying to reach out to, and how are, we going to be able to get our message across the best way possible. And so those are just some thoughts on, assisting you guys in this area. Of course, there's so many more, and we could probably spend all day talking about this. Another thing that we might recommend is also doing a mapping session, community mapping resource session, or something similar, where you actually take the time to say, who is it that we should be reaching out to? Who are the people that we need to get to the table to begin with to help us in this process? And then who is it from there that we're wanting to connect with? Because you may realize, what, we missed somebody, but now we know. And so now we can set up a community outreach, or just an outreach, meeting or anything like that, to get those people to the table with us as well. One of the things that I love is working in healing to wellness courts, because it's very collaborative and it allows for a lot of this outreach and engagement with other departments and agencies and entities and stakeholders in the community and in the state even, and really bringing those people to the table. And so depending on what it is you're wanting to do, you're going to want to consider different ways of reaching out, because not every agency, not every audience is going to take the message the same way. And so if you want to be successful in that, you're going to want to craft it to meet those individual audiences. And I believe that's mostly for me. I don't want to take over the whole presentation, so I will pass it on to Mary.
Thank you, Chantel. Good morning, everyone. Next slide. So the next slide is choosing your methods, and your method of communication is going to be very important, because you need to think about what's available in your community in terms of methods, and what your community members access frequently. In referring to what Chantel talked about, you really need to figure out your audience, and then what type of methods does your audience use frequently. Social media is one that we're all familiar with. However, you do need to make decisions about what social media your audience would be using. So whether that's Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, making those decisions based on the audience you want to reach. I know currently, if you were to use Facebook, are you thinking like, I would make individual Facebook posts as me as the person? Or are you thinking I would need to make a Facebook group? Or do I need to make an event that's occurring, and the sharing that, communicating via those posts? People are really excited about short videos right now, whether that's in TikTok form or Reels, whatever that looks like. That's something that folks are constantly looking at and paying attention to. And it may seem a little overwhelming if that's not something you are used to. However, part of this outreach and strengthening community engagement is really finding out if there's somebody you can utilize in your community who might be a resource in getting something like a short video out. Other methods, events. Are there reoccurring events or events that are already happening in your community? So does your community have like a cultural event, like a powwow, that you could be accessing and promoting the outreach that you would like to get out there? One thing folks have done in smaller tribal communities that have had pretty great success is actual door to door, where there is a survey and community members will go out to the community and go door to door to collect those surveys or to make sure there's engagement with those surveys. That might not be applicable in your community, but it is something that when they analyzed what methods work best for their community, that came up on top. So really paying attention to maybe even like old school methods of doing things might be the best for your community and your audience. Newsletters. Does your tribe put out like a digital newsletter or a physical newsletter, like a newspaper? And can you get your messaging out using those methods that are already familiar with your tribal members? Some digital newsletters are emailed out to folks. So communicating with maybe the lead at the tribal department who puts those out and getting your message in those newsletters can be really beneficial. Radio stations, another maybe old school way of doing things. But is this a way to reach folks not only in your community, but outside your community? There's a lot of help online about how to create like radio friendly splices of communication. And it's something that can be very efficient, can be cost effective too, especially if it's community based or community oriented. Some radio stations may charge you for ads. However, if it's something like a community engagement event or some sort of public service, there may be a waived fee for those. So really considering these things when you're deciding your methods. I talked about this before, but meeting people where they are. So making sure that whatever you're putting out there isn't beyond what folks are paying attention to. This is a really helpful way that Johanna talked about, is engaging with the groups of folks who have voices in your community. So, if you go and you talk to your elders committee, really talking to them about like what type of methods they like to see messaging in. If they say, I read the newsletter every week, then that's probably a good way to reach that audience. Hosting events. I talked about events that already exist, but maybe if there aren't any that exist, you could consider hosting an event. Really paying attention to what your community expects when you're hosting an event. We find that a lot of folks really love coming to things where there might be food or swag that you give away, or something that really encourages folks to participate. So you may really consider that to get folks to your event, that you offer them something besides just, hey, show up. People have a lot of things on their plate. So really figuring out what might draw them in, and that may be offering them a service, right? So if you really want to get out into the community, hi, my department offers this public service. Your event may be centered around getting that service to the folks who show up to the event. So it doubles not only as a outreach and engagement event, but also you would be doing the actual work that you're trying to get information out. I will also talk about this later, but using your data or data that you collect to target your outreach efforts. So data is a word where we will talk about it in another slide on leveraging or on data collection. But essentially, when you are choosing your outreach and hopefully strengthening engagement, which would be your follow-up, you really want to pay attention to what is working. You really want to make sure you're collecting data. And it can be as simple as writing down, like, this worked and I had 6 emails based on this newsletter ad that went out that had my email, versus like a social media post where I had 12 messages from folks about this social media post, and just starting to pay attention to your outreach efforts and whether they're working. So on the next slide, we have another question that we would love your participation in, and you can drop your answer in the chat. But this one's a little different, but what is something that your tribal community has or is working on and you wish you knew more about? So this is something that the tribe is already doing or is working on, or is a project in progress that you wish you knew more about. So thank you for adding this in chat. So some folks are saying adult diversion program. Thank you, Heather. DMV offices in remote communities in our region. Thank you, Pamela. Sober living facility, that's a huge one. I know as a former tribal public defender, we were always looking for places for our folks in reentry or in recovery to be living, and those beds fill up fast. So knowing where those are and being able to figure that out is really helpful for the community. So one of the reasons we asked that question is that there is a lot of information that can be shared that even if you work for the tribe or you're familiar with the tribe or you know the tribe is doing these projects, you still want more information. And so part of this presentation is how to get that information out to folks who want that information, who want to know more about it, who want to be able to share it with their community. Next slide. So the leverage technology slide is supposed to hopefully help make your life a little easier. It's something that I am pretty passionate about and have been working on ways in my life to leverage tech to make things easier, to make the flow easier, to kind of alleviate some of the everyday tasks on my to-do list. So one of these is to automate your routine communication. There are many ways to make this happen. We have computer apps, we have computer programs that will send emails out for you on a schedule, or I use it currently for when someone fills out like a Google form that's like, I want more information. It's automated to where an email sends immediately once that form sent out with the information that, you know, the introduction information that they need and how to contact me further. I am currently learning there is some great power automated apps in the Microsoft 365 live subscription that I'm currently working through, and a lot of online resources in terms of how to automate some of these things that you might do regularly. So if you are trying to get a communication out, so whether it's like a scheduled social media post or whether it's an email, scheduling those in advance and having those created so that it's not on your plate to remember to do those every week. And setting that up in like a calendar so that you really have the ability to maximize your time. Using technology to assist with content creation. So say your project, you were like, we are going to make these social media posts, whether it's like a small video or we're doing graphics, using tech to help you create some of those. In our like graphics software that we use Canva, and they do have templates you can use to help get information like, okay, I want to make another reminder to folks about they have 1 week to get this survey out. So they have templates so we can just enter in our own information, makes it really easy. They're also experimenting with AI. So, you know, we can put in there, hey, we need help create you know, slide for this PowerPoint on leverage technology. And there might be a slide that pops up. So some of this could be using assistance, artificial intelligence. Some of this could be programs. But using the technology to sort of create that for like if you were really ambitious and you were like, we're going to make these little short videos, AI like ChatGPT can come up with like a small script. Like you can put in there 30-second script on leverage technology, and they may be able to create something that you can use as a starting point for your own project. And sometimes the starting point is really the most helpful building blocks instead of starting from scratch. It's like, okay, here's an outline of what would be helpful. Creating email campaigns and newsletter, lots of apps for that can help engage folks, as well as text and push notifications. There are apps online that can send that information out for you automated so that it's not something you have to remember to do every week. If you really don't have an event that's occurring in your community, you have the ability to host a virtual event. So that could be like a presentation, that could be like a kickoff meeting or something where you can get folks to engage online. You are able to engage your community as well as your community members. So this may be something that while you're focused on your tribal community as your audience, if you really want to get partnerships and buy-ins of maybe nonprofits out in the community, this may be a great event where they can come in virtually and engage with folks and have their buy-in in these virtual events. Digital storytelling. So this is sort of the practice of like a small TikTok media type slice that tells a story. It can use images, video, audio, interactive features. This is one where it may be a great idea to engage with your youth or your younger population who might be really great at doing this already and being able to create some of these digital storytelling aspects. These are probably the ones that maybe folks spend a lot of time consuming online, but they do create maybe the most amount of work. So really reaching out to your community and seeing if there's folks who may already know how to do this and who may be willing to help kind of give you a little tutorial on how to do digital storytelling. Next slide. So once you do all this, you really need to pay attention to the progress and the evaluation of how you're doing things. There's two ways of doing this: engagement metrics versus output metrics. So what this essentially is saying is like the output is the engagement metrics track the level of like the ongoing interaction. So what happens after the initial output or outreach. And so your outreach is going metrics focus on that initial step of communication. So like who opens the email versus your engagement, which is like who might forward on the email or who might reply to the email. So some of these examples are written here. So like your website's going to be your unique visitors versus your total number of visitors. Paying attention, because the whole point of this, while we do love the outreach, is if we can get the folks to engage, the program that you are sharing is going to be stronger. It's going to have more folks know what it is, more folks sharing what it is, and more folks utilizing the program, which is the whole point. When you are evaluating or when you're thinking about like, is this successful or what can I do better? I really love the question, what resonated? And that's because I find folks really will engage with this question. If you ask people like what resonated with you, I feel like you get more information back or you get something beyond like, I thought it was good. They'll actually point out a detail that's like, I really liked the graphics, or I really liked that they were shared every week and I could check in and click the link. Asking yourself what can be refined, what can be improved, and how can you build on successes? So going back to what Johanna mentioned earlier, like if you pay attention to what voices are out there, so if you originally engaged with like your elders committee and you consulted with them, you can go and evaluate the progress with them as well. Asking them what feedback do they have, what did they like, what did they engage with, what resonated with them. This builds this authentic relationship that values their feedback and their input, but hopefully creates this relationship where they are also engaged in this community outreach and engagement project that you're hoping to build on, where they are encouraged by participating and hopefully will promote this program that you are trying to build on. When you pay attention to the evaluation, you are able to improve it, which is basically improving outreach and engagement because you're leaning in to keep this going. And that's the whole point, is that you want further engagement. You see it through and you see a future. So like really coming back and checking in and seeing, did the things I do make a difference? Are there ways to improve? Is there another way that we should be doing this, or continue the outreach that's going well? And I'm going to hand it over to Ansley.
Thank you, Mary. And can I get the next slide, please? So thank you for joining us today. Here's another question. Can you describe a successful community engagement strategy or specific initiative that led to increased participation in your community? So going back to what Mary mentioned, what resonated with you? What have you noticed in your community that has worked as far as outreach goes? And sometimes things will work in one community or not another, or things will things will work at one time, but not later. It's just all different. So If you have any ideas, you can just add them to the chat. Oh yeah, telling people where they can see us at the end of an outreach. Conducting a monthly lunch. Thank you. Food and raffle with the traditional activity. Food is always a good thing to get people engaged. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about building trust in relationships. When building relationships, trust is such an important piece of the puzzle. In any partnership, you have to be able to have things like open communication and dependability. And you can't have those things without first having built trust. You need to have a sense of security between parties and to know that the other person is going to follow through with what they promised. Just to know that someone is in your corner and that if they say they will do X to help you with, say, an event, that they 100% intend to do what they said they would do. This is huge as far as gaining support for your program, just to be able to depend on other people. And on the other end of that, it's important that others can trust you in return and that you remain consistent and follow through with your promises. Try to remain available and easily reachable and be that person that others can rely on or call when they need something. This is a great way to build your relationships professionally and otherwise. And also just having honesty as a priority. You know, if you aren't able to follow through with what you promised because, say, you have a family emergency, don't be afraid to be honest about it and let the other people know what's happening. It's also so important to have active engagement with trusted community voices. Say you have someone in your community that is widely known and respected, perhaps an elder or someone who's worked in your community for a long time. These are people that you should be engaging with and building relationships with, so that you have that foundational trust. And so when the time comes to discuss your program with others, you have someone else that is not afraid to speak up and voice their support for you and your ideas. Of course, you'll have a lot of internal support from within your own agency. So it's also so important to have like-minded people in other agencies that have your back. And, you know, they can be a champion for your cause so that when you aren't in the room, they can speak up for you and say, you know, this is why that program is so important for our community. You can also use storytelling as a tool for connection. This is something that has been used as a tool in Indigenous communities since time immemorial. You know, stories are the things that people remember. Stories evoke feelings, and you know, in your brain, when you have a feeling about something, it touches the part of your brain that connects to emotion. And that empathy or relating to someone else is what gets remembered. When you tell stories, people can better relate, and relating to someone else, it can make the abstract more tangible. You know, if you're talking in terms of data, for example, if you throw out a bunch of numbers, people are going to forget those figures pretty quickly. But if you attach a story to the numbers, it becomes more real and more tangible and more memorable as a result. And also just sharing something semi-personal with someone shows that you can be vulnerable, and it can help deepen the trust between you and the other person. So say you share a story about overcoming something difficult, just putting yourself out there in that simple way shows that you're trusting the other person, and they'll remember that. They'll remember that you trusted them, and it's a way to build your relationship further. Next slide, please. So foster ongoing engagement. A great way to foster ongoing engagement is to strive for continuous dialogue. So with a new program, it's great to start things out with a one-time event, but furthering those relationships could mean also saying, this is my contact information. Call me anytime, email me anytime. Don't be afraid to reach out. Or it can be having a set time for individuals to come to you and talk things through, and maybe give their suggestions, or you can gather input. Or it can mean having a series of events or a monthly event so that people continue thinking about your program and talking about it. Let people know that it's a two-way street and be a visible community member, be at your community events. When you show up in your community, you are more likely to have others show up for you. So it goes both ways. Another great way to get people engaged is to provide volunteer and leadership development opportunities. Many times, we're trying to get a program off the ground with limited funding, with maybe a handful of paid positions. So look to your community for volunteers. There may be people looking to fill their time in a meaningful way. And there's so many people in our communities that are their skills are underutilized. For example, maybe you have a stay-at-home parent that can only work odd hours, or you have a retiree looking to try something new or to stay social, or maybe you have a high school or college student looking to gain experience or add to their resume. The more people you involve that have a stake in the outcome of your program, the better the outcome because it gives you more visibility and can get more people talking. If there are opportunities to have community members volunteer, it engages them. So it can be something as simple as, you can have folks pass out flyers or help set up an event or tear it down. It can be something more official, like serving on an advisory board, which also helps people develop their leadership skills. Recognizing community contributions can go a long way. So when your community members are celebrated, they're more likely to be present and want to engage. So just even a small act to recognize what others have done to help your program, like acknowledging that someone donated refreshments for an event or someone let you use their space. You can show your gratitude in small ways just by maybe sharing a social media post about it or adding it to your weekly announcements, something like that. And just by recognizing that you have people willing to get involved, and maybe that will lead to others getting involved as well, and it can inspire further engagement, just seeing that recognition. A feedback loop. So feedback loops, this is where you can gather community feedback and analyze the input that you receive and make changes based on the insights gained. So ultimately, and hopefully, it leads to improvements in services. This enables your department to adapt and continuously improve, and it's all based on community feedback. So let it be known that you are seeking feedback. And sometimes this can seem like you're bothering people or like pestering them to fill out a survey. But that's okay because you can also let them know that their feedback is appreciated and it's going to be used for future improvements. So another big part of this is sharing it back to the community so it continues to happen. Don't stop at making the changes, but let everyone know, hey, we made these changes based on your feedback. And this is called a loop because it continues, say, hey, here's what was changed. Is there something that we missed? Do you like the changes? And they can provide more feedback. So it's an ongoing conversation. Participating in community events. This is a great way to meet other people and to show that you care about the community and want to be involved. Letting others know that you want to share in positive experiences with your community because you're part of it. And just through participating, you'll meet new people and make new connections or strengthen current relationships. And you never know what great things will come out of actually taking part in the community events. Next slide, please. And just some final thoughts for today. Think outside the box. There are endless possibilities when it comes to collaborating and engaging with your community. So we recently had an on-site visit with a tribe, and we had community members from different departments there. And just to have people in the same room from the different departments that don't usually get a chance to interact. For example, we had tribal court people connecting with grant managers, and everyone learned so much about the other programs and departments and where opportunities were being missed just because they hadn't thought to reach out to that particular department. So just as communities, our strengths are amplified when we can come together And just thinking about that, there may be people in other departments that you don't know about that could really complement your program and what you're trying to achieve and help you reach more people. Dare to fail. So there will be times when your outreach engagement strategies will fail or they will fizzle out, but that shouldn't deter you. Sometimes it's just not the right time, or you don't have the support that you need, but you can still learn so much from just getting things off the ground, even if ultimately whatever you are aiming for doesn't happen. Look at what do we learn from the things that we fail at. Taking outreach as an example, what are we learning from those times that we aren't successfully able to do outreach? What did we learn from that method that was utilized? Maybe this took a lot of time, but didn't get a lot of people there. It just wasn't a successful way to do outreach in our community. But now you know that. Turn your experiences upside down and think, this didn't work, but it was successful because we can take this from it. We can walk away with what we learned, and that makes it still be successful. Start small. So getting yourself out there is probably the biggest takeaway from today. Just put yourself out there one conversation at a time. Take things step by step and focus on what you can achieve in small parts and try to reach people one at a time. Excuse me. And eventually, those connections will start to grow and build off of one another. Just start by getting yourself involved and educating others about your program and what you hope to achieve with it, and you'll start making more connections. And consistency over perfection. I love this so much. A lot of us know that striving for perfection usually just leads to feeling overwhelmed and burnt out. So instead, aim for small, aim for consistent efforts. Think every time that I attend an event, I will try to make a new partnership. Um, I will try to make a new partnership. It's okay if I don't actually make that connection as long as I tried. Consistency is way more manageable of a goal than perfection, and it leads to more lasting results because perfection is just not sustainable. Mistakes and setbacks are all part of the process, and that's okay. And you're trying to build habits that will eventually get you to your goal. So this doesn't mean you shouldn't celebrate your victories, or when you do make a connection, you should definitely celebrate that. But you can and you should look at what you've done to build your program and recognize that even imperfect actions are still progress. Things aren't always perfect, and that's okay, because what matters more is that we're putting our best efforts into something important and worthwhile. And next slide, please. And I guess we'll take any questions. We're kind of over time, but if we have questions, we can stay on for a few more minutes.
Yeah, we do have an older question that was in the chat box that I want to mention, and I don't know if Chelsea is still on or not, but Chelsea from Tool River Tribal Court said they're creating self-help services for the community and asked if anyone had success with outreach programs or events with their courts and what was the best method, visual such as videos or reading materials. And I will also answer that a little bit, and then anyone from Niger can add to that. I would say that probably all of those methods are good because, again, you're going to have different audiences that you're trying to reach. And so looking at determining what the appropriate method of outreach is going to vary, because you may have some opportunity to show videos or PowerPoints. You may have to mail out information to folks that might not be able to make it into those events where you could show PowerPoints. You may also just have to go to where they're at and have those conversations and have a sit down. You may have to do door to door, just like kind of what Mary was talking about earlier. So I think that it really is going to depend, and I don't think you can depend on one outreach method. You have to really be creative and look at several different ones and really take those steps to do that. And again, that kind of ties into what Ansley was talking about. Maybe you get volunteers to help with that outreach if you know, have to go door to door, or, you know, the radio station. In my tribe, we did that. We actually partnered with our local tribal radio station, and we had monthly sessions where we were discussing our family group decision-making program. And we actually had participants that would go on and discuss, you know, their experience. And so that led to other conversations. And so I would say that you definitely want to kind of just look at all of the options and not pigeonhole yourself into one thing, because it really will take a lot of different things to really get out there and be successful. And I'm
I think
not
Mary,
seeing,
yeah, I think Mary can add to this a little bit about self-help resources. But one of the things Oklahoma Indian Legal Services does is they fortunately have a bus that they were given where they can like go out into the community and say, here are the self-help resources, or here are the resources we have available. So that's one like think outside the box, innovative way to like get out into the community and say, here are the resources we're providing, and we're coming to you to provide those resources. I think just generally some of the tips we've given will help with getting self-help resources out there to individuals. Think of places where people who are seeking legal help will be at. So are there any kind of clinics that are taking place in your community, or are there any like information sessions people are offering about setting aside convictions that maybe you could go and set up a table, or you could ask if you could have 5 minutes of time to present on the self-help resources that the court is offering. So those are just some thoughts about getting resources out there with regards to self-help.
thank you.
And I know some of our Indian Legal Services organizations do a great job of showing up in the community and going to the events like powwows and tabling at those events. Recently, we went to a tribe who does a like a law day. So their tribal court puts on a law day, and they incentivize it by having the attorneys who are licensed to practice. They like waive their attorney fee to be a practicing attorney, and then they just like commit to having show up to a law day, and they work on like I think trusts or wills and trusts or something that day. So the tribal court incentivizes them to kind of offer some pro se resources.
Okay, if anybody does have questions after today, you can reach out to us, and we'll get back with you and get those answered as quickly as we possibly can. Mitty, if you can move to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you again for attending today's webinar, Strengthening Community Outreach and Engagement. And thank you to Johanna, Mary, and Ansley at NIJA for joining us today. The webinar will be posted on walkingoncommonground.org, and that will include the recording and PowerPoint, and that will also be sent out to our mailing list. We should have a link in the chat box as well for the evaluation. So if you guys could take a few minutes to complete that for us, we would appreciate it before you log off. Also, if you're not able to do that, that will also be included in the materials that we send out. And while you're doing that, I also want to mention that this webinar is a part of a series of monthly webinars to support the development and enhancement of tribal courts, tribal justice systems, and intergovernmental collaborations. These webinars are brought to you by the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, the National American Indian Court Judges Association, and the Tribal Judicial Institute UND School of Law. The next webinar will be on Wednesday, June 25th, and is titled Criminal Sentencing in Tribal Courts and Post-Sentencing Options. The registration link is available in the chat and will be shared with attendees by email along with today's webinar recording and materials. As a reminder, again, there's a link for an evaluation in the chat box as well as the QR code on the screen. Please take a moment again to complete that. We appreciate your feedback. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month.